A School of Her Own by Arletta Richardson. Chapter 14. A Very Long Week. I was relieved to see Elsie in school on Monday morning. The twins were not there, nor were any of the Lawtons. "Are the twins ill?" I asked the children.
"No, ma'am," George Eliot told me. "Mrs. Abbott is afraid that someone else will get scarlet fever. She wants them to stay home until the epidemic is over."
"How about the Lawtons?" No one seemed to know about them. I was concerned about an epidemic myself, but the doctor had not advised us to close the school.
"If it were a spring thaw, I'd say there might be danger," he said. "This cold weather has slowed it up a bit."
With no wind, the stove kept our room comfortable, and we worked steadily through the day. I debated about whether I should check on the Lawtons after school, and decided against it. If Cy Lawton were back, as Elsie had insisted last week, I certainly didn't want to run into him. If the children were sick, I'd hear about it soon enough. After school, when I had left Elsie at her road, I continued slowly toward home. Len had said that he would call to see if the Romanis needed anything, and I was anxious to know how Mary Ann was. But I had many things to think through, and walking alone seemed the best opportunity to do it. A recent letter from Russ had caused me to look back over this year carefully. His plea that we should make plans for our wedding was sounding better and better to me. I had not expected so many conflicts and problems at this small school. Perhaps Sarah Jane had been right about the wisdom of accepting the easy life that Russ was offering. On the other hand... Footsteps sounded behind me, and I turned to find Abe Lawton. "Abe! You startled me. Where did you come from?"
"I've been following you, Miss O'Dell. I had to talk to you."
"Is something the matter?"
"I'm leaving. I just wanted you to know."
"Why, Abe, where are you going?"
"I don't know. Out west, maybe."
He shrugged.
"Any place where my pa ain't."
"Does your mother know?"
"Nope. I'm not telling anyone but you."
He looked down at the ground.
"You're the only one who ever paid any mind to me except to hit me. Seems like you might like me a little."
"I like you a lot, Abe, and I'll miss you. I understand you're wanting to get away. I'll be praying for you. Will you let me hear from you sometime?"
He nodded. "I won't forget you," he said. "I don't think anyone else will miss me."
Suddenly he leaned forward and hugged me. Then he turned and ran into the woods. My eyes filled with tears as I watched him go. It was ironic, I reflected, that the two students from whom I had expected the most trouble, Abe and Elsie, had turned out to be my staunchest supporters. As I continued toward the house, I decided to say nothing about seeing Abe. I was sure no one would inquire about him or be surprised when they found he had left home again. At supper time, Len reported that he had been to see the Romanis.
"Where they put themselves and 3 children in that wagon, I'll never know. I didn't go inside, but Mrs. Romani stepped out to talk to me. Through the door I could see that Mary Ann is pretty sick. The doctor comes by every day. He's sure the boys will have the fever in a week or so."
"I don't see how they could help it, staying in cramped quarters like that," Mrs. Williams remarked. "I wish they had a house to live in. Do they need food or blankets or anything we can take to them?" Len shook his head. "She says not, but she seemed pleased that I had come." School went on as usual. No one else became ill, and it seemed that there would be no epidemic after all. The Lawtons returned, and aside from the announcement by Julianne that Abe had run away again, nothing more was said about his absence. I wondered if the girls were not relieved that Abe was no longer there to be knocked around by his father. By this time, I should have been ready for anything that could happen, but I was totally unprepared on Friday when I looked up and saw Elizabeth Lawton standing in the door. It was noon recess, and the children were scattered about the schoolyard, enjoying the sunlight and cold air. She walked up to the desk, regarding me coldly. "You don't pay attention to what people say to you, do you? I thought I warned you about staying away from my family." I looked at her blankly. She could surprise me again. Since I had no idea what she was talking about now, I didn't say a word. "Did you think no one would see you right out on the road hugging my brother? Just who do you think you are?" Isn't it enough that you are openly chasing Len?
Suddenly I felt I had taken about as much from her as I needed.
I think it's time that you understood something, I told her. I have no designs on your father or your brother, and you know that as well as I do. And as for Leonard Williams, when he decides to find a girl to marry, it will be his choice, not ours. If you can't stand the thought of him having more than one friend, that is your problem, not mine. Now, I'd appreciate it if you'd find someone else to threaten. I'm tired of it.
She looked at me with astonishment.
Well, you do have a little spunk, don't you? But if you think you've heard the last from me, you're mistaken. I want Len, and I mean to have him.
She whirled around and left the room. I was more shaken by the encounter than I let her know, but I wasn't sorry I had spoken my mind. I really didn't think Len had any interest in me, but Elizabeth Lawton would never find that out if I could help it. I was happy to go home for the first time in 3 weeks. Mr. Clark and Sarah Jane were waiting for me when I came in from school. Sarah Jane surveyed me critically. "You look like the breaking up of a hard winter, Mabel," she said. "Do you feel as bad as you look?"
I'm fine, I snapped. All I need is a few days in a calm, quiet atmosphere with no problems, no decisions, no accusations, no questions.
In other words, you're ready to depart for heaven immediately. Sarah Jane laughed. "I don't think you look quite that bad. Come on, get your things together and we'll take you home to your mother. She'll straighten you out."
I'm sorry, Sarah Jane, I said. I shouldn't jump on you, but this has been one horrid day. It's almost as though I have to pay for the good times we had last week. I'll be all right once we get started toward home.
Sarah Jane was delighted when I told her of my conversation with Elizabeth. "Good for you, Mabel," she said. "It's time you stood up and made yourself heard."
You know I hate conflict,
I said glumly.
But I can't stand by and have my character maligned. Why does she persist in thinking that I'm out to get Len?
Well, Mabel, maybe she sees that he's interested in you.
Don't be ridiculous, Sarah Jane. Len has never indicated in any way that he wants to be more than a friend.
"Oh, you won't see what you won't see," she said with a sigh. "After all these years, I would think you'd begin to trust me. And I say you care more about Len than you're letting yourself admit." There was no future in arguing with her. The disconcerting truth remained that she usually was right. Ma was happy to see me.
I still haven't gotten used to this big house with just Pa and me in it, she said. I see the boys every day, but it's not the same.
She looked reflectively around the kitchen.
It's been a long time since I've mopped the floor twice in one day. I can't believe you missed that, I laughed. You have time to do things for yourself now. Don't you enjoy it? Of course, she replied. I'm not complaining. I just meant that it was different. I can't wait for summer to come, I thought.
Ma and I could both stand a few weeks of having things the way they used to be. Sunday afternoon came too quickly, and Pa took us back to school. "This week will be better, Mabel," Sarah Jane assured me as we left her in Edenville. "At least it certainly couldn't be worse." For once, Sarah Jane was wrong. Mrs. Williams appeared on the porch before I could get out of the sleigh. "I'm sorry, Mabel," she said, "but you can't come in. Leonard has scarlet fever."
"Oh, no,"
I gasped.
"When?"
"He came down with it on Saturday. Fortunately, Alice was gone for the weekend, too. Augusta Harris has offered to let you girls stay with her until the quarantine is lifted."
Why is everything falling in on me at once?
I asked Pa as we rode on toward Augusta's house.
Is the Lord sending all this to me to tell me something?
"I know it must seem like that to you," Pa replied, "but I don't think the Lord works that way. If he's trying to tell you anything, I'd say that it would be that his grace is sufficient. That's not a bad message."
I'll need all the grace I can get living in the same house with Augusta, I said. Come to think of it, she will too. She thinks I'm an irresponsible knobhead who has no business being in charge of a school. I'm certainly glad Alice will be there with me.
I didn't say so to Pa, but I was terribly worried about Len.
I realized how much I looked forward to seeing him every evening and how I enjoyed talking to him. The memory of his discreet silence about how we had met and his laughing eyes when something reminded us of that time came flooding back. Pa's promise to pray for me and for the Williams family comforted me as I moved my things into Augusta's spare room.
"You girls will have to make do with what I have," she informed us. "I may not be all you're used to, but beggars can't be choosers."
"I'm sure it'll be just fine, Augusta," Alice said. "We appreciate you taking us in. I'm sure it was the Lord's timing that we weren't in the house when Len got sick. We'll try to stay out of your way." "You can count on that," I added silently. I was sure Augusta would find something to complain about, but I didn't plan to deliberately provoke her. I woke Monday morning with a heavy feeling and then remembered where I was and why. I prayed for special strength to get through the day at school. Alice and I planned to walk home every afternoon and see how Len was. Since Mr. Williams couldn't leave the farm, we would pick up the mail and run errands. To my surprise, Augusta was kind to us. The little barbed remarks continued, but she seemed eager to help. During the day, she sewed with Alice. In the evening, she graded papers for me. She was as distraught as we were over Len's condition, for he seemed to be getting worse every day. It took all the courage I could summon to get through each school day. My prayers alternated between pleas for Len's recovery and thankfulness that none of the other children had gotten scarlet fever. It was a very long week indeed. End of chapter 14.